Hello and welcome to the Undertale Weapons Guide. This guide will discuss some of the subtleties with the weapons used in Undertale, as well as going over the damage calculation formulas and providing insights onto how damage truly works. The weapon types in Undertale can be split into two categories. There are the single-hit weapons, including the stick, toy knife, tough glove, worn dagger, and real knife, and the multi-hit weapons, including the ballet shoes, torn notebook, burnt pan, and empty gun. There are a few things that you'll need to know in order to understand the weapons. The first is attack. Your attack stat is the attack that you get from your weapons added to the attack that you get from your love. As you can see, your attack starts out at 10, but increases by 2 for every love, and the weapons also add a small amount. You may wish to save this chart for future reference. Next, let's take a look at defense. Each monster has its own defense. Note that a defense does not at all correlate with displayed defense when you check an enemy. For example, in this image, a Vulcan is displayed to have 0 defense, but the actual defense value is -10. Here is a chart of some of the actual base defense values of enemies in the game. You may wish to save this chart for future reference. Some things, such as progressing in a fight or certain items or acts, may also change the defense of an enemy, such as eating the pie on Asgore, progressing most boss fights past their last stage, and stealing Icecap's hat. If you wish to know more about the defense values for some of these effects, you may inquire in the comments, though for the sake of time, the defense values for these will not be listed in this video. Okay, let's talk about the weapon formulas now. All of the formulas provided will be slight simplifications, leaving out any rounding, flooring, or ceiling functions that are applied. This may result in very small variations if you were to use these formulas as an exact damage calculator, but overall, it would still work very well. To start, let's look at the single-hit weapons. This is the damage calculations for the stick, toy knife, worn dagger, and real knife. The code for the tough glove is slightly different and will be covered soon. The first part of the calculation is the base damage. This is found by taking the attack, which is the sum of both the base attack that you get based on love and the weapons attack, subtracting the defense, and adding a random number between 0 and 2. This random call is where all of the damage rolls for the single hit weapons come from. Next, if the hit is not a center hit, multiply this number by the target width minus the distance from the center, and finally all divided by the target width. Altogether, this value will range from 0.5 when you hit the weapon as early as possible, and 1 for hitting it exactly in the center. The specific colors on the target do not actually mean anything. All that matters is how far away from the center the hit is. A hit is considered a center hit if it lands within 12 pixels of the center. For reference, the speed of the weapons can be seen in this chart, measured in pixels per frame. Finally, the final damage is multiplied by 2.2 for a center hit, and 2 for any other hit. The tough glove actually functions quite similarly to the rest of the single hit weapons. The notable differences are that there is now a section involving the punches. Normally, you will always hit all 4 punches with the glove, so this value would equal 1, but in the case that you end up hitting less than all 4 punches, this value could be less than that, and you would do significantly less damage. Additionally, the attack bonus for a center hit is now only 2.1 times as opposed to 2.2. One thing to note with damage is that for the single hit weapons, the random component gets multiplied with all of the other multipliers. This means that the randomness can have a much greater effect on the final damage that is dealt to an enemy than if it were just added instead, and that randomness scales with how good your hit is. Okay, now let's move on to the multi-hit weapons. These weapons include the ballet shoes, torn notebook, burnt pan, and empty gun. On screen is some basic information about each of these weapons. Note that there are a limited number of patterns that each weapon can have, which makes it easier to perfect with some practice than if the patterns were to be completely random. Also, the speed of the weapons has no random aspect like in the single-hit weapons, which once again makes these weapons easier to perfect. Here are the damage formulas for the multi-hit weapons. Unlike in the single-hit weapons, these are all covered by the same formula. Like with the single-hit weapons, we'll break this formula down into parts. The base damage component for the multi-hit weapons is the same as for the single-hit weapons. Simply take the attack from your love, add the weapon attack, and subtract the defense stat. Note that, unlike with the single-hit weapons, you do not add the random component here. The next component, score divided by 160, is a little more complicated. Each of the bars of an attack adds a certain amount to the score based on how close it was to the center, measured in frames. Here you can see a chart of these score additions. You can see that the weapons with more bars can have a larger score. There's one extra component to this score, though, that we will discuss later. This next component, of 4 divided by number of bars, works with the score to balance the weapons with different amounts of bars. As you can see on this chart, combining the score component and the bar component, all the weapons have the same maximum value for this component. That is, except for the part of the score that we have not yet discussed. There is a bonus of 1.25 times for any hit above 400 score, and another bonus of 1.8 times for a hit above 430 score. These score bonuses stack, so any hit above 430 score gets multiplied by 2.25 times. Note that the actual score has to be above 400, and the burnt pan and the empty gun are the only two weapons that are capable of getting either of these score bonuses. As you can see in this chart, this makes it so that the burnt pan and the empty gun can do much more damage to enemies than the other multi-hit weapons, more than twice as much even. This makes the burnt pan and the empty gun the most powerful weapons in the game, even capable of dealing more damage than the real knife. And finally, we have the random component of the damage, but unlike in the single hit weapon category, this random value is simply added on the end. As a result, it does not scale with how well your hit is, it will always just be 0 to 2. Additionally, 2 of the enemies in the game change how damage works a little bit. In the Undying fight, your damage gets multiplied by 21 for every attack. This is applied to the final damage dealt, so the random multipliers are multiplied by that amount also, as well as any other component. Similarly, Jerry has a damage scaling factor, but this time it does 0.2 times as much damage. This is why Jerry, despite not having a high defense stat, does take much longer to kill than other enemies. That will be all for this weapons guide. If you have any questions regarding any of this, or are curious about any other aspect of weapons that have not been made clear here, feel free to leave a comment on this video.